What if the bloodiest battle of World War I wasn't saved by a brilliant attack, but by refusing to attack at all? In 1916, an entire army believed that offense was sacred, retreat was shame, defense was weakness. Yet at Verdun, as thousands of men died every day, one general quietly asked a dangerous question: what if everything we believe about winning is wrong? He was mocked, he was doubted, and if he failed, France might collapse. But what he did next turned Verdun from a graveyard into a legend. Stay to the end, because this wasn't just a battle. It was a rebellion against the rules of war.
You walk the streets of Paris in 1916 and hear it everywhere. The invincible faith in French doctrine. Attack, advance, overwhelm. Officers chant as if the words themselves were armor. You see soldiers marching in neat columns during drills, rifles slung, bayonets polished. You feel the pulse of confidence, the certainty that France, the great republic, cannot be broken. Every commander, from the generals in their marble-lined offices to the captains drilling recruits in muddy fields, enforces this doctrine. It is unassailable. It is law. The artillery must prepare for the attack, infantry must charge, and defense is only temporary, a pause before counteroffensive. You hear whispers, perhaps doubts among the lower ranks, but they are drowned by the echoing march of belief. You move among the men. You smell the crisp early morning air, the leather of boots, the faint iron tang of blood from training accidents. The belief is everywhere, the rule of offense. You witness soldiers polishing their helmets and writing letters home, feeling invincible. They trust the doctrine like a god. But in 1916, that rule was tested. You hear the rumble from the northeast. Verdun is under threat. The Germans advance. The world you know, the one built on tradition and offensive zeal, is about to collide with a reality that refuses to obey the rules. You feel the first tremor of fear. Officers confer over maps with rigid postures. You see the anxiety in their eyes, though they mask it with military precision. The war you know, the war you are trained for, may not survive its first proper challenge. You hear the stories from soldiers returning from the front, towns shelled into ruin, trenches flooded with mud, comrades felled by artillery fire before they could fire a shot. You feel it in the marrow of your bones. The rule is being questioned. And yet, the French command laughs. They mock the idea that a young general could alter the tide of this catastrophe. Who could defy doctrine? Who could pause the offense when every map, every manual, every tradition says forward? You see the first signs of disruption. Communication lines strained, morale fraying. Yet belief holds strong. You can almost hear the words of your instructors echoing. In France, victory comes from the attack. But Verdun will not honor that rule. The world of certainty, polished drills, and ironclad doctrine will tremble under fire. And into that uncertainty steps a man you cannot yet understand. A man who will bend the rules themselves to save a city and a nation. But in 1916, that rule was tested. You hear the rumble from the northeast. Verdun is under threat. The Germans advance. The world you know, the one built on tradition and offensive zeal, is about to collide with a reality that refuses to obey the rules. You feel the first tremor of fear. Officers confer over maps with rigid postures. You see the anxiety in their eyes, though they mask it with military precision. The war you know, the war you are trained for, may not survive its first proper challenge. You hear the stories from soldiers returning from the front, towns shelled into ruin, trenches flooded with mud, comrades felled by artillery fire before they could fire a shot. You feel it in the marrow of your bones. The rule is being questioned. And yet, the French command laughs. They mock the idea that a young general could alter the tide of this catastrophe. Who could defy doctrine? Who could pause the offense when every map, every manual, every tradition says forward? You see the first signs of disruption. Communication lines strained, morale fraying. Yet belief holds strong. You can almost hear the words of your instructors echoing. In France, Victory comes from the attack, but Verdun will not honor that rule. The world of certainty, polished drills, and ironclad doctrine will tremble under fire. And into that uncertainty steps a man you cannot yet understand. A man who will bend the rules themselves to save a city and a nation. You arrive at the Verdun sector before the storm. The town seems sleepy, almost serene. Cobblestones glint in the weak sunlight, and smoke rises from scattered chimneys. Farmers still tend fields, unaware that their homes are about to become the fulcrum of history. Soldiers move in steady, predictable rhythms. You see them polishing rifles, sharpening bayonets, cleaning boots, performing drills over and over, as if repetition alone could ward off disaster. They joke, smoke, and swap rations. You hear laughter under the crisp morning air, light and brittle, as though mocking the tension that simmers beneath the surface. Yet tension is there. You smell the damp earth of the trenches. Mud seeps into boots. You hear the rat-a-tat-tat of distant artillery, growing louder each day. You notice the unease in officers' expressions, the way they glance toward the horizon, scanning for the enemy that always seems just out of sight. The world outside the trenches is calm only in comparison. You hear townspeople whispering about reports from the front, French losses mounting, German artillery pounding villages into dust. Children peek from windows, clutching dolls smeared with soot. Soldiers exchange uneasy glances, knowing they will soon occupy the same ground their maps cannot yet describe. You feel the camaraderie, the boredom, and the fear entwined. Training exercises become microcosms of the chaos to come. You witness sergeants yelling orders in the mud, privates tripping over wire, and the relentless grind of preparation. Every day is a rehearsal for disaster, yet the men persist, embodying faith in a doctrine that has yet to confront reality. You hear rumors of supply shortages, whispers of exhausted artillery units, and the murmured worry of reinforcements delayed. The maps in officers' hands are clean, neat, yet they hide the blood-stained truth. And while life continues, unease grows in the corners of mines and trenches alike. You feel the tension rising, the invisible hand of impending disaster touching everything. The wind whistling through barren trees, the distant rumble of enemy movements, the sharp tang of smoke from exploding shells in training zones. You sense the storm before it strikes. And then, a new name begins to circulate. Philippe Pétain. Young, meticulous, unassuming. But somehow people whisper, he sees the battlefield differently. You hear doubts from some, scorn from others, but also a spark of curiosity. Could doctrine bend? Could a man save what everyone else assumes lost? You meet Philippe Pétain, though not in person. You see his meticulous planning, the letters he writes to subordinate commanders, the maps spread across tables in dimly lit rooms. Born in 1856, 38 years of service, tempered in campaigns from colonial Africa to the Western Front, he radiates a quiet authority. You sense his mind at work constantly. He moves through chaos with a calm precision, balancing logistics with strategy. He worries about men, about morale, about the roads clogged with ammunition wagons. Every detail matters: food, water, medical supplies, artillery shells, reinforcements. You hear his doubts in private. Can doctrine hold if the enemy refuses to play by the rules? Can France endure this? Can he bear the responsibility if Verdun falls? You feel his anxiety radiating in measured gestures, in the tension of his shoulders, in the tight lips when reading reports of incoming bombardments. You see his humanity. He walks the trenches, speaking quietly with soldiers, inspecting mud-caked boots, adjusting uniforms, reassuring the terrified. He listens. He does not lecture. You hear the fear in their voices, but also the trust slowly building. He understands that the conventional rules, the relentless offensive doctrine, will fail here. He begins to envision something radical, a defensive strategy Not surrender, but a systematic conservation of men, a rotation of units, a concentration of firepower where it is needed most. You sense the gravity of his choice. He knows that challenging tradition will provoke ridicule from his peers, anger from superiors, perhaps dismissal. Yet he cannot act otherwise. You feel him pulled toward the impossible decision, to abandon the unbreakable rule and defend Verdun with method, calculation, and ingenuity. And as the rumble of artillery grows closer, the shelling begins to shadow the horizon. Pétain makes his move. You stand beside him as he surveys maps, fingers tracing the line of the Meuse River. Verdun is surrounded by enemy forces. The German artillery is devastating. Over 1,200 guns pounding trenches, villages, and forests. Every minute that passes, French lines are eroded, morale is tested, and casualties climb. You see the numbers in your mind: 1,000 men killed, 2,000 wounded, 15,000 shells raining down daily. The logistics seem impossible. How to supply fresh troops, rotate units, provide food and medical aid, and still hold the line? Failure is total annihilation, the loss of a symbolic French city, and a psychological blow that could shatter the nation. You hear his internal debate: advance and die, or hold and risk shame? Officers around him scoff, citing tradition, citing doctrine, citing honor. The weight of ridicule presses on him like a physical force. But you see his resolve harden. He knows this. Verdun must hold. Not through daring attacks, not through reckless valor, but through organization, discipline, and relentless focus on supply, defense, and rotation. He commits to an action that will redefine the battlefield. You feel the stakes in every breath. A misstep could mean tens of thousands of dead, the collapse of French morale, and the embarrassment of the entire army. Yet he makes the decision. Pétain will defend Verdun systematically, using a rotational system for troops, reinforcing key points, and ensuring that no soldier fights more than necessary without relief. You see him issuing orders with precision, coordinating rail schedules for artillery and munitions, prioritizing medicine and rations, and establishing a rotating relief system for the frontline units. He is calm, determined, and relentless. And so, with the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders, he commits to the impossible, to save Verdun by defying every rule the army once held sacred. You march through the trenches with the men. Mud squelches beneath your boots. The smell of cordite and blood mixes with the morning mist. Artillery fire shakes the ground beneath your feet, every shell a reminder that the enemy is relentless. You hear the whistle of incoming shells. Soldiers duck. You hear screams and orders. You see Pétain coordinating from a command post. Telegraph wires hum. Messengers sprint through the mud, bringing reports of units at breaking point. You hear him issuing calm, precise orders. Rotate the 45th Infantry Division out of Sector F. Move Artillery Battery 23 to cover the eastern flank. Send medical units to ravaged trenches. You feel the tension. Every second counts. You see soldiers rotated systematically. Exhausted men leave mud-filled foxholes to receive food, water, and rest, replaced immediately by fresh troops. Casualty lists mount. 2,000 men wounded in a single day, 500 killed in another sector. Yet the line holds. The Germans push relentlessly. You hear machine gun fire tearing through the fog, shouts in German and French mingling in the roar of battle. You see Pétain adjusting defenses on maps, reserve troops to cover gaps, artillery concentrations to break assaults, trenches reinforced with sandbags and barbed wire. Hours turn to days. Soldiers march along the supply lines, ammo and rations loaded onto carts. You hear explosions tearing apart forests, smell smoke and burning timber. You see young soldiers barely out of school clutch rifles in terror, yet steadying under the rotation system. You witness near-defeat moments, a battery overrun, trenches flooded by shelling, communication lines severed. Yet reinforcements arrive exactly on schedule. Pétain's system works. Each rotation brings fresh energy. Each concentrated artillery salvo disrupts enemy momentum. You hear officers around you breathing heavily, coordinating counterattacks, observing the enemy's confusion. The Germans begin to hesitate. Shells land on the wrong coordinates. You see enemy formations stagger, morale waver. The defensive genius is palpable. Pétain is not winning by heroics alone, but by precise, ruthless calculation. The days blur together. You feel hunger, exhaustion, mud clinging to every inch of your body. You hear the constant background roar of shells. Yet the line persists. You see soldiers saved from exhaustion, artillery hitting its mark, and reinforcements arriving just in time. By the end of the first month, the tide shifts. You hear rumors among German officers of unbreakable French positions. You see shattered enemy troops retreating under counter-barrages. Pétain's methodical defense, once mocked, is now the shield that holds Verdun. If you find this kind of forgotten military history as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. These stories of courage and sacrifice deserve to be remembered, and subscribing helps ensure they do. You step through Verdun after the first major German offensive is repelled. The town is battered, streets pocked with shell craters, roofs missing, windows shattered. You see soldiers exhausted, some limping, some still clutching rifles despite injuries. You count the losses. Roughly 163,000 French casualties in the first months. German losses over 143,000. Yet Verdun stands. You feel the enormity of survival. You hear whispers among men, stories of comrades saved by careful rotations, by timely reinforcements, by artillery hitting precise targets. The Germans reassess. You see their intelligence reports noting the unexpected resilience of French lines. You hear commanders questioning the offensive doctrine that led them to this slaughter. Pétain's reputation spreads quietly but swiftly. The young general who defied the rules to preserve his men. You feel the emotional weight of what has been endured. Fear, fatigue, grief, relief. You witness soldiers digging mass graves, comforting the dying, patching wounds, and writing letters home to loved ones. The battle continues, but the immediate disaster is averted. You sense the larger significance. Verdun becomes a symbol of national resilience, a turning point not because of flamboyant heroics, but because of meticulous planning, disciplined rotations, and the courage to challenge orthodox doctrine. You hear the names of the fallen: Private Henri Leblanc, 19, from Lyon; Corporal Jean-Marie Dubois, 21, from Toulouse. You see photographs of the survivors, eyes haunted yet alive. You feel the human cost, tangible in every scar, every lost limb, every story etched into memory. Pétain survives the war, rising to Marshal of France. You see his methods studied by future military planners. You hear echoes of Verdun in defensive doctrines worldwide. Yet you also sense the complexity. He would later face controversy in history, but the lessons of Verdun endure. You stand in the empty trenches, imagining the fear, courage, and discipline that held a city from falling. You feel the weight of legacy, careful planning, respect for soldiers' lives, and the courage to defy convention. Even today, Verdun teaches you that leadership is not only bravery in action, but wisdom in restraint, and that survival often demands method over heroics. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or country, and tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that Philippe Pétain and the 163,000 men of Verdun do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered.